Boldwood presents A New Start for the Shop Girls, written by Rachel Brimble and read by Willow Nash. Chapter 1. City of Bath, January 1910. Elizabeth Pennington turned off the final light in the ladies' department of Pennington's department store and wandered through the semi-darkness to the window. She stared at Bath's premier shopping street below. Christmas had passed just over a week before, and all the excitement and possibilities of the new year beckoned. 1910. Even the year held the ring of a new beginning, a new start for something bigger and better. Yet, how could she revel in any possible excitement when her plans to advance her position within the store were still halted by her father? She crossed her arms as, once again, her frustration mounted. Would this be yet another year where she remained static, her father holding her caged and controlled? As the only child born to Edward and Helena Pennington, Elizabeth had been a happy child under her mother's care, homeschooled by a governess before being launched into society. Yet the balls and teas, at-home visits and theatre had soon grown tiresome, and she had longed to accompany her father on his days at work. Edward Pennington, amused by his daughter's emerging passion for all things retail, had consented to her coming along whenever possible, teaching her the basics of merchandising and marketing, allowing her to serve as a shop girl. A role that had satisfied Elizabeth for a while. Until, in 1906, her father had opened the largest department store fashionable Edwardian Bath had ever seen. From the moment she'd stepped into its sparkling foyer, Elizabeth would not be shaken from working as the head of the new ladies' department. Having finally won her father's agreement 2 years ago, she'd launched herself into the role with determination and commitment, proving her worth through steadily increasing sales, footfall and morale amongst her staff. Now she wanted more, deserved more. Elizabeth breathed in deeply as she stared at the hatted men and women who streamed back and forth on the busy street, the trams slowing to pick up or allow passengers to disembark. How many of these women had she dressed and accessorized? How many had she helped to spend their father's or husband's money? Did they, too, long to stand tall and proud and spend their own earnings from their own success? Although Bath was still only a small-scale industrial city, it was identified by its social elite. A city that was a bustling oasis of the firmly established upper class, and also a newly emerging middle class. It was these people that Elizabeth grew more and more determined to entice through Pennington's doors, thus demolishing its reputation of being a place where only the moneyed belonged. She turned from the window. 24 years old, and still she had nothing to call her own, nothing to hold on to as evidence of her enthusiasm, vision and skill. If her father's belief stood that women had no true place in business, why introduce her to retail's excitement and possibility? Why pretend she was even needed at Pennington's? The entire country hummed with the underlying fever of women's progression. The right to vote was on the minds and lips of the majority of women who frequented the store, tea shops and boutiques. How could her father continue to ignore such impassioned determination? Women were finally making a stand and, sooner or later, Edward Pennington would have to admit defeat or risk losing the very gender that made up the bigger ratio of his profits. Time and again, Elizabeth suspected his employment of her had been nothing more than a way to control her willfulness. A calculated plan allowing him to witness her predicted failure in order to be proved correct in his view that women were little more than vessels in which to bear children. Tears of frustration pricked her eyes, and she swiped at them as she strode from the department and into the main corridor, battling the debilitating fear that her father's treatment of her might one day force her to take her life, as it had her mother. Helena Pennington had once been a beautiful, intelligent and gregarious socialite, a woman wanted by men and emulated by women. Her deep red hair and startling green eyes were revered throughout her social circles. The way Helena raised her only child, teaching Elizabeth about compassion, love and empathy, as well as enjoying her daughter's happiness to work beside her father, had been something admired rather than frowned upon. But as close as Elizabeth had thought she and her mother were, Helena hadn't the strength to fight her husband's continuous disparagement, verbal torment and disdain. Not even for her only child. For a long time, Elizabeth had struggled to forgive her mother for leaving her alone with Edward, but 4 years on, she understood her mother's desperation and had entirely acquitted her. After all, her mother's death had given her the resentment and passion needed to fight every inch of her father's dominance. She walked to the gleaming white balustrade surrounding the circumference of the second floor and gripped its mahogany rail. Pennington's magnificence showed in every crystal chandelier, every glass cabinet, and every luxury item on display. It was all there for the public to crave, aspire to own, and want more than anything else. The few remaining staff tidied and organised their stations before leaving for the day. No doubt going home to family, or maybe for a meal or drink with friends, maybe even lovers. Whereas she would remain here, waiting to be escorted home by her father, the great Edward Pennington. How much longer could she go on doing his bidding, adhering to his rules and expectations, when deep in her heart she wanted so much to spread her wings, to show him who she was and what she could achieve for him and the store? She had to speak to him, had to make him listen. Lifting her chin, Elizabeth headed for the grand staircase that spiralled from the lower to the upper floors of Pennington's breathtaking atrium. One by one, the dazzling lights were extinguished. The lit glass counters and extravagant displays of merchandise plunged into darkness. Pride swelled her chest as she climbed the stairs towards the top floor. Before her father had opened this mammoth store, nobody had seen the likes of Pennington's outside of London. But Edward had successfully brought the glamour and enticement to Bath. Anyone who was anyone wanted to be seen here. Aristocrats and gentry, bankers and lawyers, actors and performers. They all came to Pennington's to shop, to depart with their purchases in the store's exclusive black and white bags, a rare idea of Elizabeth's that her father had taken on board, a unified logo that worked as a walking advertisement as soon as paying customers left the store. An idea he had eventually taken credit for himself. She reached the upper floor and almost bumped into Mrs. Chadwick, her father's ever-admiring secretary, at the top of the stairs. "Good evening, Mrs. Chadwick." "Ah, Miss Pennington." Mrs. Chadwick smoothed the grey curls from her brow and pushed up her spectacles. "I believe your father is still in his office." "Thank you. You have a lovely evening." "I will. You too, Miss Pennington." Elizabeth continued her sure-footed journey to her father's closed office door. Tonight he would listen to her. Tonight he would not provoke her self-doubt. She was worth more than her singular role as head of the ladies' department. She wanted to shake up the men's department too, and inject a renewed energy into the toy department. To her mind, both current department heads had become stuck in their ways, in much the same vein as her father. If Pennington's had any chance of remaining the consumer's #1 choice of where to shop, the store had to move with the times and the demands of the people. Inhaling a strengthening breath, she lifted her hand and knocked on the door. "Come." Gripping the handle, Elizabeth entered the monster's lair. Her father sat behind his huge walnut desk, his silver-haired head bowed over some papers, his usual early evening whiskey within hand's reach. Elizabeth crossed the plush sapphire blue carpet and sat in one of the 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Good evening, Papa." He raised his steely gaze to hers.
"Elizabeth, did we not agree to meet at 6:30? I'm still finishing off a few things."
"We did, but I was hoping—" She briefly closed her eyes and straightened her spine. "I want to speak to you about some new
"Not again!"
Her father slapped his pen to his desk and glared.
"My decision still stands." You made the trip to London and Selfridge's against my wishes. Now you return with a plethora of newfangled ideas. I will not stand for you
using my imagination. Elizabeth glared, her frustration sparking her rare interruption. Wanting to make something more of myself than just being your daughter. He leaned back, the anger in his eyes cooling to malice.
You are my daughter, Elizabeth. Lord knows I wish she were my son. But there we have it. I have a daughter, a single daughter.
As you so often like to remind me, Elizabeth ignored the telltale increase of her pulse. She would not falter. I want to push forward in the world. Prove to you and myself that I wasn't destined to spend my days overseeing the ladies' department while waiting for a rich gentleman to whisk me off my feet. I want
more than I'm prepared to give you.
America is leading the way in retail and department stores. Their success is well ahead of Britain. We'd be foolish to stand by and allow that to continue without challenge. He huffed a laugh.
And what would you know of America? You barely move from the house to the store. You refuse invitations to balls and soirees. You turn your back on potential suitors as though each of them is beneath you.
I do no such thing.
No?
He arched an eyebrow and put his forearms on the desk.
Then when did you last attend any kind of social event? What is it you are so afraid of, my dear? Do you think a man might advance on you? Make you think about more than how you wish you could bury your father and take everything he's built? Is that it?
Heat rose in Elizabeth's cheeks as her father's glare bored into her soul, making her tremble. Damn him and how inferior he could make her feel with a single look. Damn him for how he continually made her aware of her female status. She leaned forward. Why would I want to be with a man when I have you and your senior staff as examples? I want more, Papa, and one way or another I'll have it.
Is this where you tell me again we need to concentrate on the middle class? That they are the customers who could make up our primary market?
As a matter of fact, yes. More and more people are moving up in society through hard work, opportunity, and determination. Pennington's needs to give them what they demand, or someone else will.
And you see their demands as what, exactly? I refuse to have my store brought down to the level of the common herd. Pennington's caters to the carriage trade. What would you have me do, Elizabeth? Sell alcohol? Fish?
He huffed a derisory laugh.
Heavens above, girl, what is wrong with you?
Elizabeth inwardly cursed the shaking in her hands as she clasped them in her lap. Whether you like it or not, people are coming up in the world. Women are demanding more rights, a voice, and equal respect that is given so freely to men. Do you not think there is potential in providing these women affordable merchandise? Harnessing their desires, making Pennington's a place they come for their clothes, scent, and jewellery will be a boon for us. Why are you being so short-sighted about this?
What absolute nonsense!
Elizabeth leaned forward and glared. And what of the shop girls?
What about them?
They are dedicated, loyal, and work extremely hard. We should implement a staff afternoon tea break. They work near 10-hour days. Would it be such a sacrifice to introduce a 20-minute break in the afternoon? His eyes widened in disbelief.
In addition to their lunch hour?
Yes. Looking after their welfare will benefit us in the long term.
Their welfare?
He picked up his drink and took a hefty gulp.
Their welfare comes in the form of their wages. If they do not like working here, they're at liberty to leave. There are plenty of other young women who would be only too glad to work at Pennington's. Our reputation
is in dire risk of being tainted. His jaw tightened.
I think it best we draw this conversation to a close, don't you? Why don't you take a carriage back to the house?
He put down his drink and pulled some papers towards him.
I will see you at dinner with Mr. Kelston and his parents this evening.
I assume this dinner is yet another ruse to convince me that the man whose marriage proposal you are so insistent I accept is worthy? That I should give up my work here, marry and stay at home like an obedient wife?
You are 24, Elizabeth. He raised his head. "Your hair will not always be as red as it is, or your skin so unmarked. God knows your mother's looks faded soon enough."
Anger shot through her. "Do not speak of Mamma that way." He smiled.
"How much longer do you think a man will even consider you for his wife? Noel Kelston is a good man, a hard-working man, a man who
will inherit a railway fortune that his father worked for. I do not want such a man. I want a man who strives for his own living, his own ambitions and desires."
"Yet time and again you do your utmost to convince me to hand everything to you the minute I retire."
"As you would have if I had been a son. How hard do I have to work to prove myself to you? How long do I have to run the ladies' department before you see I am worthy of so much more? Sales, footfall and morale continue to rise under my management. Can you not see that I am more than capable of extending my skills through the store? I want more, Papa. You know I do." His cheeks mottled.
"And you think overseeing an additional department or implementation of your ideas will give you happiness?"
"I would at least like the opportunity to find out. What else can I believe? Mamma's death showed me all too clearly that a woman's happiness cannot be found with a man, a home and marriage. To work, and work hard, is my only option for fulfillment. Anything else would either scar or kill me. Unfortunately for you, Papa, I'm not prepared to take that risk." His eyes narrowed. "You are a woman with ideas above her station, and I'll be damned if I'll have my peers joking and jeering behind my back that my daughter persuaded me to allow her to run this store. You will marry, Elizabeth. That is your role. If you are not careful, you won't work here at all." Frustration brought Elizabeth to her feet, and she clutched her purse tightly. "Do you not see it is your attitude that made me who I am today? Your insinuation that I'll never achieve what a man could has only driven me harder and harder into retail. Maybe if you had believed in my abilities years ago, I might have given up the idea of working here and gone on to become the wife you so desperately want me to be." She shook her head, her heart beating fast. "But not any more, Papa. I've invested too much of myself into the store to ever let it go."
"Fine."
"Sorry?" The breath left her lungs. "Did you say fine?" A gleam came into his eyes, and he sneered.
"Marry Noel and let him decide whether you continue to work. If you think my views antiquated, why not find out how a husband sees them?"
Sickness clutched her stomach as familiar hopelessness pressed down on her. "Noel is 15 years older than me. His views are not so different to yours, and, as you've implied, our family business will be more his than mine should we marry. Why would he not do exactly as you demand?" He looked back to his work.
"I'm not listening to any more of this. I will see you at home shortly."
Elizabeth glared at his bowed head. How could he continue to do this to her? How could she surrender to the life he'd given her mother, the death he'd given her? Suffocation squeezed at her throat, and she stormed from his office. Firmly closing the door behind her, she stood stock still and concentrated on levelling her breathing. Was living with a man who would eventually destroy her all she had to look forward to? Be that her husband or her father? Their turbulent relationship weighed heavier and heavier. He had recently turned 60 and embarked on a pastime of taking lovers 30 years his junior, an insult to Elizabeth and her beloved mother, barely 4 years dead. The women he paraded in front of Elizabeth as though he did nothing wrong varied in hair colour and wealth, but all were malleable and admiring, subservient to her father's every wish. Not that their amicability kept them with him for more than a few weeks at a time. Women, after all, were entirely dispensable, according to Edward Pennington. Stepping away from her father's office door, Elizabeth strode along the dark, wood-panelled corridor towards the lift, the lit, ornate wall sconces flickering. She met the lift attendant's gaze. "Ground floor, please, Henry."
"Yes, Miss Pennington."
Elizabeth stepped inside. She refused to falter. Something would inspire her any day now. It had to. Chapter 2. Joseph Carter smoothed his tie, happy with his reflection in the spotted mirror at the rear of his family's milliners and glove boutique. Smart, professional, confident. He faced his father.
What do you think?
Robert Carter barely glanced from the felt on the workbench in front of him, his half-spectacles halfway down his nose.
You'll do.
Joseph smiled.
If Penningtons agree to acquire my gloves, it will provide the extra income we need that will enable you to finally retire. I'm not doing this for Penningtons, as you seem to believe. I'm doing it for us, for you. You deserve to spend some time doing the things you enjoy, Pa. We can stop making hats and just concentrate on our gloves. If we have Pennington's backing, who knows how good our future could be?
His father's blue gaze darkened with concern.
That may be, but you shouldn't have to sell your soul to that place.
My soul will remain my own. Department stores are the future. Joseph took his hat from the stand, struggling to not give in to his exasperation. It will benefit us if we get on board with them. Think of the exposure, the number of new customers who will discover the Carter and Son name.
But at what cost?
His father shook his head.
Working yourself into the ground won't make you happy, Joseph. I curse the day you lost Lillian, but how much longer will you go on living alone, working hour after hour?
Pain struck at Joseph's chest and he glared.
I didn't lose Lillian. My wife was murdered at the hand of the bastard who stabbed her. If only you believed that.
Joseph held his father's saddened gaze, his pulse thumping.
I do. You do not. You believe her death was your fault, that you deserve to live forever as a single man, to know no other happiness than monetary. Living this way cannot be all there is for you.
It's all I want. Joseph tugged his lapels, straightening his suit jacket. If I had been with Lillian that night, she'd still be alive. I owe it to her to make a success of our business, to build the means to help others, as she would have wanted. If Pennington's provides the source of that income, I'm going to accept it without apology.
Right, and she would have wanted you to devote your life only to the business, to live the rest of your life unmarried, without the children you both wanted. Those wants and dreams don't disappear, Joseph. You're hurting and hiding behind your ambitions. You're not going to be happy until
her killer is found, I know. Don't you think that's something I pray for every damn day? His father held his gaze, his cheeks mottled.
That wasn't what I was going to say.
No? Anger swirled in Joseph's gut and he glared. Well, what else is there to say? All the time that lowlife's still out there, I won't be happy. While he walks free, Lillian's murder goes unpunished.
It's been 2 years, son. 2 years. The chances of finding him grow smaller every day. You've tried offering rewards, walked the streets and spoken with constabulary over and over again to no avail. What else can you do? You have to start filling your life with more than vengeance and hatred. Otherwise, it won't just be Lillian dead. It'll be you too. Inside.
Joseph put on his hat, his hand shaking. He needed to change the subject before his temper rose any more. Look, men and women everywhere are looking for speed and convenience. They're looking to impress their friends and neighbours without waiting for their wares to be made. That's what Pennington's is all about, providing an instant service where their clientele can see and touch the products before they've parted with a penny. It's shopping genius, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. I have to be a part of it if I'm going to implement Lillian's dreams of helping those less fortunate. That's all I'm concentrating on right now. His father lifted his hands from his worktop and held them aloft in a gesture of surrender.
Fine, do what you have to do. But, mark my words, there is more out there for you than work, and it's no less than you deserve. Just go. I've got hats to make, and it wouldn't do to keep the uppity lot at that department store waiting."
Joseph stared at his father's silver hair and stooped shoulders, sadness squeezing his heart.
"I'll see you later." "That you will."
Leaving the shop, Joseph breathed in the smoky air as he walked along Pulteney Bridge, passing the rows of shops either side. Clouds rolled in as the January sky above Bath darkened, threatening another rainy afternoon. Picking up his pace, Joseph joined the people heading towards the city centre, the scent of rosewater and pomade infusing his nostrils. He studied the suited men and women making their way back to offices and shops at the end of their lunch breaks. The timing of his visit to Pennington's was intentional. It was after the morning shoppers had bought their daily wares, but before upper-class ladies emerged from their homes to take afternoon tea in the store's fancy restaurant. Joseph wanted as few people as possible to witness his potential snubbing. He took a risk by putting himself forward as a supplier to such an enormous store, but ambition had overridden any lingering doubts that he might not be taking the right course of action. The Carter family business could no longer go on as it had. His father was tired and deserved to hang up his scissors and needle. Things needed to change, and Joseph was on the cusp of making those changes. His changes. His beloved wife had understood his need for more, had understood his burning desire to take them from merely existing to thriving. He might have been born to working-class roots, but he refused to be permanently entangled in poverty's vines. But Lillian was dead, and her loss haunted him. He would not stop until he'd achieved what they'd set out to do together. Success, the ability and funds to help others, to open the locked doors of opportunity to the poor. He would make it happen, for him and for her. It had been soon into their brief and passionate courtship that Joseph had recognised Lillian's hunger to do more. Her kindness and empathy with those less fortunate, as natural to her as her beautiful blonde tresses and pretty pink lips. In the 18 months they'd been married, he and Lillian had devised a plan for the business and a way to help those struggling. Through hard work, frequent laughter and individual sacrifice, they had worked with his father to produce hats and gloves that quickly became admired amongst the classes. Slowly but surely, with the added bonus of Lillian's exemplary selling tactics and charm, profits had grown, giving them the extra money needed to provide food and blankets to the homeless and struggling. Living a better, more giving life had been all they'd wanted. And children. Joseph clenched his jaw against the stinging in his eyes. He was certain that they would have been blessed eventually. Regret clenched around his heart. Now he'd never know. Joseph slowed to a stop. Pennington stood in all its glory near the top of Milsom Street, a huge white stone building with twin entrance columns covering the width of what had once been 4 boutique shops. Pennington's now owned them all, and its grand opening ceremony, a 5-story upwards extension, was revealed, thus creating the largest and most prestigious store in the city. It was where Joseph intended his designs to shine, where he dreamed his gloves would be displayed in a way that had been impossible before Pennington's arrival. Once the masses began to buy his designs, the Carter and Son income would soar, and Joseph would finally be able to make the tangible difference he and Lillian coveted. Her death strengthened his determination that today would go well. Despite his father's protestations, Joseph knew he deserved to live his life alone for failing to protect her, for choosing to solve a work problem on that fatal night, rather than accompanying her on their rounds as he usually had. Only belief that he had something of value to offer the world would go any way towards stemming the bleeding deep inside his heart. Studying the displays in Pennington's large plate-glass windows, Joseph cast his gaze over the rolls of satin, silk, cotton and velvet. White, ivory and cream were interspersed with shots of dark, daring fuchsia artfully swathed over tables, dressers and boxes. Brooches and pearls, necklaces and cuffs flashed and sparkled amongst an abundance of hats and gloves he considered of a mediocre standard at best. It was time to show Penningtons what affordable craftsmanship was all about. Stepping back, Joseph touched the brim of his hat, allowing 3 giggling young ladies to enter the store ahead of him. They hesitated, their eyes brightening with interest and their cheeks colouring faintly as they studied him. Joseph met their gazes with confidence and tipped his hat.
Ladies.
They emitted a trio of delicate sighs before dipping their heads and entering Pennington's fantastic foyer, their arms intertwined as they chattered to each other at a speed that would make a man's head spin. He followed them inside, and the smell of money mingled with expensive scent and sweetness from the abundance of flower displays. Tall white columns stood sentry on either side of the entrances to the various departments, while the central atrium was breathtaking in gold and marble. It was vital to his success that he understood every part of what the store had to offer its customers. Pennington's was a rising commodity, one he didn't doubt had the potential to expand around the globe, and he would absorb its every lesson and merge them with his own until Carter & Son was the name on every woman's lips. He fought to keep his face impassive and not let his awe show in his manner or expression. He could not afford to reveal how much Pennington's inspired and intimidated him in equal measure. He deserved to be here. He deserved to have the store consider his product. For as far as the eye could see, marble shone and crystals sparkled. Glass-fronted counters displayed goods designed to entice and delight. Young, slender and impeccably uniformed shopgirls stood to attention behind or in front of their counters, perfectly coiffed hair and delicately applied cosmetics enhancing their beauty and allure. He approached a board in front of 2 handsome lifts, their doors painted gold and opulent enough to be at home in Buckingham Palace. The ladies' department was on the 2nd floor. The lift doors opened and the young uniformed attendant nodded at Joseph.
Going up, sir?
Indeed I am, young man. The ladies' department, if you please.
Certainly, sir.
Joseph stepped inside the lift, removed his hat and gripped it tightly in front of him. Rare nerves leapt in his stomach. He wanted Pennington's to commission him as soon as humanly possible. It was one thing that he'd managed to pull himself from the drink-induced, self-loathing gutter he'd wallowed in for a year after Lillian was killed, another if he slipped back into the abyss. Pennington's had the potential to inject fire in him for a future he never would have imagined before the store opened. He exhaled a slow breath. He was the last of the Carter line, and there was no chance of him departing this world without making his mark. The lift pinged, the doors brushed open, and Joseph stepped confidently onto the 2nd floor. Chapter 3. Stepping from her office at the rear of the ladies' department, Elizabeth strode onto the floor and abruptly stopped. The gentleman stood with his back to her as he spoke with Aveline Walden, the deputy head of the department. Therefore, it could only be the breadth of his shoulders and his impressive height that caused her hesitation. Or perhaps it was the shine of his dark brown hair curling over his snow-white collar beneath a suit of maybe not the best quality, but most certainly handsomely tailored. Whatever it was, Elizabeth's feet refused to move.
I've many designs I would like the opportunity to share with Miss Pennington. I truly believe they will be an asset for the department, and Pennington's as a whole.
His voice was deep and unnervingly commanding.
I am happy to wait if Miss Pennington is—
Good afternoon, sir. Gathering her wits, Elizabeth stepped forward. You wish to speak with me? He turned. An immediate startle lit his bright blue eyes before they darkened with interest and then changed again with what looked to be sorrow, as though he constantly carried an invisible pain. Yet, despite her concern, something indiscernible struck Elizabeth about this man. She couldn't let him leave without finding out who he was and where he'd come from. She held out her hand. Elizabeth Pennington. He blinked, as though collecting himself before dipping his head.
Miss Pennington?
He took her hand.
A pleasure. Joseph Carter at your service.
A strange connection with this man bubbled inside her as Elizabeth eased her hand from his grasp and laced her fingers together in front of her. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation with Mrs. Walden. You are a designer?"
"I am."
He held her gaze, determination darkening his eyes as he stood a little taller.
"I would very much like the opportunity to share some of my gloves with you."
"For?"
"For your possible consideration of adding them to your displays. I will take no more than a few minutes of your time."
His gaze softened.
"I assure you."
Despite the interest this stranger ignited inside her, Elizabeth lifted her chin. The man clearly deemed himself as important to her success as every other male within Pennington's walls. Only this one wanted something from her, not the other way around. She crossed her arms, enjoying the rare power. "You have some designs with you?"
"I do."
He lifted a brown case from the floor beside him and tilted his head to the sketchpad beneath his arm.
"If we might move to the counter, I'll—"
"Have you supplied to a store of this size before, Mr. Carter?"
"No, but—"
"Do you have a significant size business?" The gleam in his eyes vanished.
"We have a moderately sized workroom in the back and the shop itself. Why do you ask?"
"Say I like your designs and decide to give them a trial run. You'll be expected to supply, quickly and in large numbers. If that's not possible, I'm afraid we are wasting our time." He held her gaze.
"I will meet any and all of your demands."
Elizabeth's heart jolted. His quick response had sounded loaded with innuendo. Did he think he could mock her? She pulled back her shoulders. "You are a man with ambition. Someone who wants to be a part of something new and revolutionary?"
"I am."
Ignoring the flutter of the potential prospect she sensed in Joseph Carter, Elizabeth drew her gaze over his face. He really was extraordinarily handsome. She could not imagine anyone wouldn't be tempted to buy from this man, male or female. "And do you enjoy the sales side of business?"
"Very much so, but it would be dishonest of me not to admit that designing and making gloves is my passion."
There was a fine line between confidence and conceit, but the way Mr. Carter described his ambition made it very hard to be certain whether or not he crossed that line. Her fascination and curiosity piqued. She turned to Mrs. Walden. "Maybe you can check Mr. Carter's testimonials, and we will decide on a time and date for a meeting. My diary is on my desk." She smiled at Mr. Carter. "I'll leave you with Mrs. Walden." She offered her hand. "It was nice to meet you." His eyes glittered with interest as he slowly enveloped her hand in fingers that were strong and slightly work-roughened.
"I look forward to meeting with you again soon."
Elizabeth's heart quickened as her smile wavered. This man evoked an extremely unwelcome self-awareness. She slipped her hand from his and nodded before exiting the department. Stepping towards the staircase, she gripped the banister and descended the stairs. Anticipation fluttered in her stomach and her mouth itched to smile. Joseph Carter had an aura of dangerous excitement that would be irresistible to men and women alike. His handsome face, extraordinary eyes, and easy smile surely marked him out as the perfect salesman. His designs were something she was willing to consider, but her instinct told her Mr. Carter would benefit Pennington's on the shop floor more than he would working at his own premises. Glove-maker he might be at present, but who knew what the future might hold for someone as charismatic and clearly driven as Mr. Joseph Carter? She pressed her hand to her stomach, more than happy to be the one to find out. "I assume you have testimonials as per Miss Pennington's request." Joseph dragged his gaze from the archway through which Elizabeth Pennington had disappeared and faced Mrs. Walden. The green of Elizabeth Pennington's eyes and the deep, dark red of her hair lingered in his mind, and he swallowed against the undeniable stir of attraction. What in God's name just happened? He was here to push forth with his plans, but his sensibilities had been shot astray by a beautiful woman. Something that hadn't happened since he'd last set eyes on Lillian.
"Indeed I do."
Joseph pushed away his guilt and hastily drew some papers from his inside jacket pocket. He held them towards Mrs. Walden.
I have produced work for many women of quality who are willing to vouch for me, not to mention 1 or 2 gentry.
Mrs. Walden glanced at the papers, her brown eyes softening. That may well be so, Mr. Carter, but Miss Pennington isn't the sort of woman to be unduly impressed by credentials. She raised her eyebrows. Or male charm.
Male charm?
Joseph huffed a laugh.
I assure you I am here to propose a unity between myself and Miss Pennington that will be of benefit to us both.
I'm sure you are. She folded the credentials. I see your address is clearly marked on the papers. Once myself and Miss Pennington have had a chance to consider your testimonials and consulted our diaries, we'll be in touch regarding a meeting. Joseph tried to assess what Mrs. Walden needed to hear from him to muster a little more of her enthusiasm. He had sensed Miss Pennington's faith in her deputy, and he didn't doubt that one wrong move and a meeting between them would never be scheduled. He couldn't allow that to happen. However, for the time being, he had no choice but to bide his time. There was no way he would fail in having Pennington's buy his gloves. He firmly clasped Mrs. Walden's hand.
I thank you, ma'am.
As he walked from the department, Joseph hesitated, reluctant to leave the store altogether. Ever since Pennington's had opened, a strong sense of belonging overcame him each and every time he stepped inside. He'd be foolish to ignore or squander the chance to linger a while longer. Talk to the staff and have them remember his face and name. His father might be reluctant to encourage his son's ambitions, but Joseph didn't need his father's approval to understand that in this newly emerging world of consumption and greed, it was eat or be eaten. Customers wanted a different kind of shop and a different kind of shopkeeper. Pennington's, he was certain, was just the beginning of what would become a worldwide change. If he could have his designs displayed and sold here, it would be the first step towards achieving his and Lillian's most ardent ambitions. Failure was simply not an option. If he was granted a meeting with Miss Pennington, he needed to be ready and prepared with a deep knowledge and passion for the store, not to mention the possibility of what his designs and vision might mean for Pennington's. Moving from department to department, Joseph carefully watched the shopgirls and the way they interacted with the clientele, and, in turn, noted the customers' varying responses. The ladies and gentlemen who wandered the marbled floors and ran their hands over the luxurious and expensive merchandise were of a class he was used to serving at Carter & Son. Yet the hunger in their movements and the almost manic gleam in their eyes was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Money exchanged hands, and order books were opened and written in at a mind-boggling speed, as the gasps and squeals of delight from the ladies and the hearty laughter and good cheer of the gentlemen mingled with the soft, hushed voices of the cajoling staff as they charmed their way to selling item after item. Joseph could barely contain a smile as the fire in his belly grew from a slow burn to an out-and-out inferno. Every hair on his body tingled with possibility. Here, Lillian, here is where I will atone for my neglect that night. Atone for the loss of you. One day, I promise, justice will be done, and then maybe we'll both find peace. How could his father not understand his son's vow to live his life alone while his wife's blood continued to stain his hands? What woman deserved to be with a man who couldn't protect her? A man like him did not deserve the love and care of a woman. His loneliness was just, his empty life warranted. Mr. Carter, do you find yourself unable to leave us this afternoon? Elizabeth Pennington's soft voice whispered like silk over his skin, and Joseph turned, her green eyes hitching his heart a second time. He swallowed and forced a slow smile.
On the contrary, I wish to leave, but find one thing after another captivating my attention.
Satisfaction seeped into her eyes, a light flush darkening her cheeks. And what could it be in haberdashery that so mesmerizes you?
If you'll allow me to show you.
Her gaze lit with curiosity, and she nodded. Joseph turned to the pretty shop girl standing behind the glass counter to the side of him.
May I look at that tray of buttons?
He tapped his finger on the glass.
The ones in differing shades of green.
Certainly, sir. The girl extracted the tray and laid it on the counter. Joseph tipped her a smile before plucking 2 different buttons in 2 different shades from the tray. He held them at Miss Pennington's temples, level with her eyes. Surprise flashed in her gaze before she raised her eyebrows and her study returned to calm assessment. Can I ask what you're doing? He smiled.
This button is in the shape of a flower and a deep brown green, almost like moss dipped in soil. Whereas this triangular one is a startling emerald, bright and crisp, as though kissed by sunlight.
And?
And both are colours I've seen in your eyes. So, was I to make you a pair of gloves, I would think of your eyes as I selected the kid, silk or satin with which to work. I would picture your eyes as I stitched the cloth and shaped the fingers. But when it came to the decoration, I would not think of your eyes.
She carefully studied him before a soft smile lifted the corners of her mouth, her gaze holding just a hint of amusement. What would you think of?
I would think of exactly where I'd like you to wear them, and with what dress. I'd think about the kind of woman you are, and how I want you to feel when you're wearing my gloves.
Her gaze slowly roamed over his face. You really do think highly of yourself, don't you, sir?
Nothing could be further from the truth.
He returned the buttons to the tray.
But of my work? Yes, very much so.
She studied him a moment longer before turning to the shop girl. Thank you, Flora. She looked at Joseph. Walk with me. Surprise rippled through him, and Joseph fought to keep his face impassive as he dipped his head, extending his arm for her to lead the way. She strolled ahead, and he exhaled a shaky breath before following, wondering where this impromptu walk was headed and for what reason. Had he ruined his chances by being so forward with her? Had his picture-building failed with Elizabeth Pennington rather than succeeded as it had with others? He studied the shine of her hair, the way her spine was so straight and her waist so small. The woman radiated purpose and clearly did not suffer fools lightly, yet she also had a quieter aura, which he couldn't quite put his finger on, something that interested and concerned him in equal measure. Worse, he felt a kinship with the flashes of distrust he'd seen in her eyes, understood the aloofness at the possibility he might intend to hoodwink her. He couldn't help but admire her integrity. Joseph walked slightly behind her and waited for her to initiate further conversation. Do you live above your shop, Mr. Carter? Might I ask where it is?
Pulteney Bridge.
Joseph turned his gaze from the shoppers around them to study the back of her elegant head. Why would she ask such a question?
And yes, we live above the shop. My father and I have lived there since my mother died a few years ago.
You've lost your mother? She stopped and turned to face him, her eyes softening.
I have.
Would it be impertinent or insensitive of me to ask you how she died? Joseph frowned.
A shadow on her lungs. It was a long death that I'd not wish on anyone.
Lillian's killer rose in his mind.
At least, no one I've met yet.
Her chest rose as she inhaled and looked past him. Then I hope you bear your loss better than I do mine. His kinship with her uncomfortably deepened, and he cleared his throat.
You've lost your mother too?
She nodded, a deep sadness in her eyes. Yes.
I'm sorry.
An inexplicable need to comfort her twisted inside him.
They are always with us, you know. My mother was a formidable woman.
And a loving one?
She was, very much so.
The sense of loss emanating from her obvious wounds reopened those within himself, those he had to believe were healing. The alternative would mean he would have to endure so much more than self-inflicted solitude. He could not allow his grief and anger to taint his passion for his work. Only success could bring his next breath, make him awaken and strike each new day as an opportunity to repent. She nodded a greeting to two elderly women wearing fox furs and elaborate hats as they passed by, arm in arm. When Elizabeth Pennington faced him again, the coolness had returned to her eyes. "And your father? Does he thrive without his wife's care, or has he changed since her passing?" Joseph struggled to decipher her thoughts, the intention behind her questions. People bustled and shouldered past them, the atmosphere fraught with eagerness for the next discovery, the next purchase. Was she so oblivious to the intoxicating power of her family's store that his personal life was of more interest? He had no desire to discuss his loved ones and could not understand why she would wish to either.
"These questions about my family are disconcerting. After all, I'm here as a supplier, nothing more."
"You object to me asking about your family?" Her curtly asked question stilled him. The last thing he wanted was to upset or irritate her and jeopardize his chances of working with Penningtons.
"It's not so much that I object."
"I like to know my staff and business associates, Mr. Carter. Contrary to what others might say about me, I don't manage my department like a machine." He followed her gaze to where two women harangued a salesman over the cost of a yard of satin. The bolts of colour piled alongside and on top of one another gleamed like a bejewelled rainbow. Joseph's fingers itched to feel the lavishness of the cloth. "I run the ladies' department with feeling, Mr. Carter, and that feeling extends to my staff and their families. I want the people who work with me to be happy. I want to ensure they are not suffering unduly, and if there is anything I can do to help in their home lives, I will." Joseph studied her. She was most definitely not the stern, snooty-nosed ladies' department manageress he'd been prepared to barter with. In fact, not a single one of his imaginings had anticipated coming face to face with the future heiress of the store. Elizabeth Pennington was intelligent, kind, and almost carefully distant, and one who unnervingly fascinated him. It seemed her father's name might lay in the bronze plate above the store's grand double doors, but Miss Pennington had ambition and her own way of working. Could hers and Joseph's business association propel them both towards the places they wanted to be? Her eyes darkened with curiosity, or possibly suspicion. "In return for my care, I expect honesty. Will you tell me why you look around the store and study the staff and customers with such intensity? It's as though you want to devour every part of Pennington's." Her choice of words and the undeniable pride in her tone were admirable, but Joseph also understood they implied provocation and challenge, qualities that stirred a raw and dangerous yearning to prove himself invaluable to both her and the store. He looked at the elaborate stained-glass dome above them as he considered how best to reply. Nothing came to mind but the truth. He faced her.
"From the moment I walked into your store when it first opened, Pennington's has been calling to me, and I want to be a part of it."
"So your designs would be exclusive to Pennington's?"
"We could definitely agree on exclusivity for certain designs."
"But not all?"
"No."
He shook his head.
"Not all."
She studied him intently, her beautiful eyes revealing her consideration. "Your protectiveness over your products is admirable."
"I'm glad you think so."
He ran his gaze over her face, lingered a moment at her lips before meeting her eyes once more.
"Maybe it is meant that you and I work together, that I have a hand in Pennington's success, come to understand your vision, and you do the same in return."
She huffed a laugh. "There might be others you need to convince of your skill before you get a glimpse of my vision, Mr. Carter." Surprised, Joseph raised his eyebrows.
"Others? You're not solely in charge of the ladies' department. Is it not within your authority to decide what is bought and sold?"
Her gaze cooled. "Rest assured, the ladies' department is mine to do with as I will." Joseph mentally kicked himself. Something in his question had prodded at a viper in her bosom. He'd be wise to tread carefully.
"Of course."
"Myself or Mrs. Walden will be in touch." She stepped away, stopped and then returned to him. "Do you have dreams, Mr. Carter?" Dreams so fantastic they're in fact almost incredible. His heart quickened. Had she sensed his desperation? Did she think his ambition futile? He forced a smile.
I do. My dreams are so incredible that I look forward to shocking you with each and every one of them.
The longer she stared, the more the tension between them grew, as though a spark had been lit. Its heat licked and teased Joseph's chest as her smile spread to a grin before she turned and walked away. Chapter 4. Elizabeth closed her office door and strode to her desk. She surveyed its neat surface, everything in its place and ordered, unlike her galloping thoughts. Almost from the moment she had seen Joseph Carter, and even more so after talking with him, her intuition bellowed that he could quite possibly be what she'd been waiting for. She sat in her chair and gripped the edge of her desk before closing her eyes, waiting for her habitual distrust of men and their continued trampling of equality to re-emerge. Her premonition of possibility which surrounded Mr. Carter made little sense. She'd even yet to see his designs. But something in the manner of his speech and address, the impertinent glint in his eyes, spoke to her. The pale grey shadows beneath his startling blue eyes and the roughness of his hand when he'd taken hers made her suspect him a working man, one who wasn't afraid of long hours and little sleep. Yet still he held himself with indelible authority and verve. Excitement and undeniable attraction opened her eyes, her heart quickening. To be drawn to such a man would be folly, professional and personal ruin. She needed to exercise caution and not allow her imagination to run amok. Her father would never consider employing a lower-class man like Mr. Carter anywhere but out of sight in the workroom. But what harm could Joseph do as a supplier? He clearly wished to escalate his prospects. Had he been right when he'd said that by working together they could meet their mutual aspirations? The possibility stirred the drive Elizabeth had previously thought waning. She had identified so much of herself in that man. At first the connection had been unnerving, but the longer she spoke with him, the more she felt his coming into the store had been fate. God's deliverance of her next way forward. She had a feeling that whatever Joseph Carter wanted, Joseph Carter got, and she would not allow a potential ally to slip through her fingers. But she could not trust the man too easily. She had first-hand experience of just how little male staff thought their female counterparts capable of. This infuriating and insulting mentality presented a battle she would fight to the end. As Edward Pennington's daughter and the rightful heiress to his empire, passion burned inside of her to ensure the female staff would one day be as revered as the men. That the women who worked at Pennington's came forward with their ideas and innovations the same as any of their male colleagues. Equal opportunity had to be made possible, even if equal pay felt like an objective that would never be achieved. If it wasn't for the forward thinking of Mrs. Walden, Esther Stanbury, their head window dresser, and the other women at the store, Elizabeth would feel she fought the fight entirely alone. Thankfully, she had friends at work and in her personal life who rallied for change as much as her. She hadn't had an inkling of derogatory insinuation from Mr. Carter. In fact, he'd looked at her with nothing but respect and interest. And it was the interest that had somehow sped her heart and heated her body in places that should not have been heating. She rose from her desk and left the spacious back room she utilised as an office. Walking onto the department floor, Elizabeth studied the lady customers as Mrs. Walden and the other female staff served and showcased various scarves, hats and gloves. Elizabeth narrowed her gaze. The customers' eyes were not lit as brightly as she would have liked, their expressions showing only mild interest as opposed to eagerness. If Mr. Carter's gloves could muster more enthusiasm than what she currently witnessed, all the better. She needed to devise a plan that would appeal and serve them both. He would have to be tested in the first instance, and they could build from there. Her current suppliers were satisfactory enough, but they had offered nothing new or different for the last few seasons. The colours changed, the occasional adornment, but nothing astounding, nothing that could be found nowhere else but Pennington's. What if Mr. Carter's designs trumped the store's current stock in ways she couldn't even imagine? Mrs. Walden finished serving and approached Elizabeth. "Is everything all right, Miss Pennington?" "Absolutely. I wonder if you can spare me a moment at my desk. I'm eager for your opinion on Mr. Carter." "Of course." Elizabeth waited as Mrs. Walden left instructions with the other staff before removing some papers from under the counter and following Elizabeth into her office. Moving behind her desk, Elizabeth sat. "Please take a seat." As soon as Mrs. Walden was comfortably seated, the papers lying in her lap, Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter greatly impressed me during the brief time I spent with him, and I'm curious about your first impressions." Mrs. Walden's gaze turned thoughtful. "My first impressions were of a man most keen to work with us. In fact, I found his avidity quite inspiring. He seems very confident in his abilities, yet from what I have read in his testimonials, he has no experience outside of his own shop, which I believe he runs with his father." "And you deem that a negative as far as him supplying Pennington's?" "Not so much a negative. I just wonder if he fully appreciates the pride we take in delivery and service." Disappointment threatened that Mrs. Walden echoed Elizabeth's own reservations. "You have doubts of his ability to keep up with demand should his gloves sell well?" "I do." Mrs. Walden lifted her shoulders. "It's unfortunate, but I really can't see how he could supply as our bigger associates can." She scanned the papers. "It says here that he only has a moderate workroom at his premises. Most of our suppliers have warehouses." Elizabeth frowned.